welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today again, we are happy to welcome back Debbie Laaser, Director of Faithful and True, as our guest. How are you doing today, Deb?
Great, thank you. It's
fantastic.
Good to be here.
We started our last podcast by talking about transition and change, and I guess by the time that we got to the end of the podcast, we discovered we had even more to talk about. So I'll let you pick it up, Greg, and take it from there.
For those of you that weren't with us the last time, what brought this about was we have requested topics from our participants, and if there's an issue that they're interested in with the podcast, and someone suggested that we talk about the idea of how do you navigate transitions in the midst of recovery. And so we did begin to talk about, just if your family is moving, or if there's been a loss of a job, or if children are going off to college, just the natural transitions that we go through in life, how recovery sometimes can make those more complicated, and other ways that can make it simpler. And so we just want to continue that conversation. And I know last time we began talking about the change model that Virginia Satir mentioned, and we talked about chaos and how in early transitions and changes, we can expect chaos.
Mm-hmm. And it's good to just normalize that and to know that there's nothing wrong with us when we enter into a period of chaos, when we're going through a transition, to be kind to ourselves. Sometimes our self-talk is the hardest thing about making a transition. We start saying terrible things to ourselves, like, you idiot, why can't you just do this better? And you're just so stupid. And, if there must be something wrong with you that you can't do this, in a quicker or more calm way. Talking to ourselves those ways is not helpful. I mean, recognizing that change is hard. Mm-hmm. And for some, it's really hard. And I think the more we acknowledge and find ways to transition through things with normalcy, the more we're able to handle the next things that come along also. And we get better and better and better at change, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so, practicing that, it seems like a funny thing to say, but we can practice change, right, and get better at that.
Well, and one of the things you identified is sometimes change triggers our shame. Mm-hmm. And so even understanding, as I'm going through a change, are there some shame messages that get triggered for me? And kind of like what you're saying is, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot. A powerful shame message is, I should be better at this, or it shouldn't be that difficult. And so recognizing that as we are navigating the chaos, to stay in the truth. Change is difficult. It makes sense that this is challenging. It's okay sometimes if I forget something in the midst of change. Mm-hmm. And you talked about and kind of identified, as we leave the season of chaos, what does Virginia identify as the next season in the change model?
Well, she calls it integration, which for the most part is about integrating new belief systems when we start to move towards something different. We might believe and start integrating that, this will take some time. We were talking about a new computer, or we were talking about coming out of the pandemic when maybe we've been working at home and now we're going to go back to the office. Integrating new belief systems about that, like, this will feel awkward and it's going to take more time. That's one thing I've noticed, that I can't just roll out of bed, do a quick brush through my hair and hop on Zoom, Now I got to get the whole thing ready, and that takes longer. And so belief is that I need to allow more time, and I will forget things. That's one of my belief system, is I'm figuring out what I want here and what I want at home. So looking at integrating new belief systems, and then her next step is practicing those, is what will start to lead to a new place that we will live.
Well, and the way I kind of see the integration, it's the living in the in-between. You've kind of got a foot in the old way, you've got a foot in the new way, and that's going to make chaos. And I remember growing up watching Star Trek, and when they would beam down to another planet, there was a point where they were in the fuzzy in-between. Mm-hmm. They weren't on the ship anymore, and they weren't on the planet, and that integration piece is that fuzzy in-between. I'm not fully in the old way, but we're not fully settled in the new way. And one of the things, even mentioning this idea of the fuzzy in-between, is going to be exciting because you are moving to something new, but it can also be a place of grief as you become aware that you're leaving something behind. Mm-hmm. Beth and I have often laughed. Early on in our relationship, we discovered that she has the ability to pre-grieve. and she can know that she's going to miss something in the future and start grieving it. I do not have that gift. I cannot grieve until I'm experiencing the loss. And so for some couples, even as they're packing up their suitcases or packing the boxes, someone in the coupleship can begin to grieve the fact that this move is happening. Somebody else needs to be in the new place. They need to miss some things. They need some time away from the old place. So in this season of integration, you're even moving through the grief differently and just being patient and kind with each other and not making judgments. Well, the old life must not have been important, or you don't miss our friends, or you don't miss the house just because you don't see your spouse grieving in that. It's just that maybe they're not there yet as everybody kind of moves through this transition.
Yeah. I think it can be a time, too, if we're not careful, where we really want to go back to the old. And I can remember this so clearly when I changed careers, actually, to join Mark full-time in Faithful and True and counseling and going back to school. I left my career that I'd been working in for quite some time. And, the chaos hit for me, didn't hit for Mark, hit for me. And I can remember so clearly thinking, it was really great back there. I loved what I was doing, and this new place, it's kind of messy and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not good at it either. And, so that desire to want to go back to that old status quo is a huge pull. I think, our ampersand that we talk about here can be so helpful in this stage of change, that if we can remember the both and, there were good things back there, and no doubt in time we will experience something that's also good as we move forward. But right now, it's like you say, totally fuzzy. We're not sure what in the heck it's going to look like.
Well, and I think that example of you and Mark and the transition of you becoming fully at Faithful and True is a great example where for you it was creating a lot of chaos. For Mark, it was just creating anticipation. He was excited about this. And a lot of times, couples go through changes very differently. And for one, it may represent more difficulty, more challenge. There may be more grief. And the other person, though, it's more about excitement and anticipation. And it's important that we are able to be with each other in that and give space for the other person to be where they are. So for Mark to hear your chaos, your concern, your grief, your anxiety, your fear, and for you to be able to be aware of his excitement and anticipation of y'all being able to work together and to do this professionally.
And the comfort that came with Deb being here to get working together with Mark. He had to be terribly excited and yet confident and comforted that you're not off running your other business, but you're here hand in hand working with him.
Yeah, both of the experiences, both of the realities were valid and very different.
Yeah, that good old ampersand. It helps us get through a lot of messy stuff, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes.
Well, and you mentioned the next thing about practice. And what would Virginia Satir say about the practice stage of the change model?
Well, as we practice, things do get more comfortable, and I think we feel more confident. And so probably the anxiety does start to fall away as we know, it's getting clear where I'm going, and every day doesn't feel so messy all the time. But practice is what we do when we make a change in anything. I think of a golf swing. Mark and I used to talk about that, and we love golf. And when we worked with our instructors and they made suggestions for how to grip differently or stroke differently, at first it was so awkward, and trying to integrate all this new information, just looked like it may never work. And we want to just go back to how we used to swing, and it was good enough, But the truth is practicing new ways of doing that eventually made that feel familiar and the old way to feel unfamiliar. We do that with our couples too when we're teaching them our iceberg model, for instance, and how to talk more safely with each other and to reveal more about what's going on inside of me instead of always asking questions of another person. And, it just takes a lot of practice to do that. It's not a normal way people think about talking oftentimes. So practice is a great stage that she identifies that the more we're willing to invest in that, probably the quicker we're going to move on to something new.
Yeah, and I also see practice as an opportunity to become more comfortable with the possibility of it not going well. Many times when we're going through change, the thing that we're anxious and fearful of is this isn't going to work out, or there's going to be something difficult about it. In the last podcast, we talked about when the pandemic began and the decision to go to the virtual workshop. And I can tell you those first several virtual workshops, I had a laundry list of things that I was concerned about. What if this happens? What if this happens? And one of the things that helped me were those things happening. What do I do if I'm doing a virtual workshop and my internet goes down? I had this anxiety about what happens. Well, that happened one time and we survived it. And what I discovered was I got knocked out, but the other guys didn't, so I could immediately come back in. There was a relief of, oh, that's okay. I don't like that. But when that happens, that is survivable. And so I think the practicing stage helps to create a familiarity and even maybe encounter some opposition so that we can have more confidence in our ability to navigate whatever comes up in this new experience.
I suppose, just to be on the other side of that a little bit, practice could also teach us that we're not going in the right direction. It could, if we listen carefully to how the Spirit is leading us within. I hear couples sometimes telling me from out of state they're working with someone on their marriage, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and it feels horrible every time they come home. And I want them to listen to that, because while they're practicing and trying new things, if again and again and again and long term, that's how they end up feeling, it could be that was the wrong step for them. And that they're integrating and making a practicing move is going to be something else. So we do want to listen to that and not always say, well, we have to move through this, because if we're going to get to a new place, it's absolutely essential. It may be that it's the wrong move.
Right. And there is just truth in that sometimes we make a decision to do something or try something, or maybe something is imposed on us. And at some point, we had hope that it was going to work out. We wanted it to work out. And we begin to realize this isn't going the way that we thought, and we need to be open to other options or other possibilities. And then I think the last thing that Virginia talks about is the new status quo. And, we talk about at the couples workshop that there's a comfortableness and a familiarity that comes with the new status quo, not a sense of perfection or peace. I mean, a lot of times we unconsciously or consciously believe if I make this change, then everything will be okay. And I kind of would refer to that as a change fantasy. Anytime the phrase is, if we do this and we do it right, then everything will be okay, there is a piece of that as a fantasy. So the new status quo isn't this perfect new reality, but it's this comfortableness, familiarity that does move us closer to becoming the men and women that God created us to be. That ultimately is the kind of discerning aspect of a change that we're making, or a transition. Is this moving, or how can I steward this change to become the person that God created me to be?
And I think most of us would identify that as a healthier place for us. And it may be a place where there are things we can be grateful for in that. Like you say, it may not be everything. It may still be hard, but we're recognizing some character changes in ourselves, some movement towards being a better version of who we are. And those are all pieces of learning from something that we've gone through that we would consider a transition or a change in our life.
Well, so we've talked about the change model, and what's true is, as a culture, even as a world, there's this new season that is coming as it appears as if some of the components of the pandemic are changing. And so we're hearing about more openness. And as Randy's identified, we're even planning to start bringing people back into faithful and true. And just to be able to say, again, even if there's something that we desire, even if there's something that we wanted, if it involves change, it is going to create chaos. And I know that the staff here at Faithful and True has spent many conversations kind of talking about what does it look like for us to start bringing back and welcoming guests, not just locally for the groups and appointments, but around the country to start coming back for the workshops that we do. How have those conversations been for you as you've tried to discern what the next right step might be?
Chaotic.
Absolutely. Well, you're right where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, of course. I'm feeling this way, and everyone else is. And I think every Monday we hear different information from the CDC and our own governor, and so even though we land on something, it seems like we are off on another change because we have new information. So we have felt fairly assured with some of the latest information about our next plan for change. And I guess I could get into it right now. Our listeners
absolutely.
might want to know what that's going to look like. We as a staff here are going to return and get used to our offices again and do that in the month of June. And we are planning to open up to clients in the early part of July and start our in-person groups here then as well. And our first in-person workshop for the Men of Valor will be held in July also. So we feel fairly confident that our state is ready for that, our governor's ready for that, and I believe we all feel ready for that in a way of providing safety for ourselves and for those who will be coming here.
I've been here alone for the past 14 months
Yes.
at Faithful and True.
How's that change going to be for you,
I've
Randy?
had 4,200 square feet of counseling center to myself, and I've gotten quite accustomed to it. So these people who are coming in and milling around, I guess they're staff.
Yeah, we're interrupting
who
your
are,
space.
who are you and what do you want and stuff. No, it's a welcome sight to have the team coming back in. The time without them here has allowed us to, there's been a positive side because some projects that we've wanted to do along the way, we've had the space, the time, and the opportunity to get some building improvements. Not that the building needed a lot of improvements, but it's kind of been rewarding to see changes that we've wanted to do that we've been able to accomplish while we didn't have the staff here.
Well, that's a great point, because one of the things that's true is we experience positive benefits during the being out of the office during the pandemic. One of them may have been to the building and some updating or whatever, but I know that one of the things that we're aware of is how effective our workshops can be doing them virtually. I can own that, back in April of 2020 when we did our first one, I had lots of questions about whether or not it was going to work and how effective it was going to be. And I had my anxiety about the internet and what if it goes out and, would people be interested in coming? And after having done them for 14 times, we absolutely see that they are effective and there's a benefit to them, and that there's a group of men. It's interesting that we do a survey at the end of the workshop, and one of the questions we ask is, would you rather come to an in-person or would you rather come to a virtual? And many of the men have said they would actually choose the virtual for a variety of different reasons. And because of that, we're planning to carry something that we learned from the pandemic into the future. And at times, we haven't identified any dates yet, but at times we will do another virtual workshop because we know there are those men that traveling is difficult, getting the time away from work or the expense that comes along with that. Traveling may not be something that is conducive to their budget, but they can set aside 3 days, stay at home, and experience the workshop. And what we know at this point is it is effective. And so that's an example of we're not fully going back to the old the old way. We're going to bring some new stuff that we've learned from the pandemic into the future of Faithful and True.
Yeah.
Well, and the results that we have seen with that questionnaire that we send out has really been revealing and quite rewarding because, as you say, Greg, there have been those that said, I absolutely, totally was helped, benefited, transitioned by the virtual workshop. One man came out and said, my struggles with unwanted sexual behaviors was based on in the internet, and to use the internet via the virtual Men of Valor workshop, for that to be part of the solution, kind of opened his eyes to the internet doesn't have to be the evil empire.
Right.
It could actually be the jumpstart of his healing journey. So we've had a whole number of men who say, I miss the in-person connection of community with the other men and yourself leading it, while other guys said, I have now formed a weekly Zoom group with the men that were in my small group at the workshop. So, I mean, there's been really positive responses in support of both forms of the workshop.
Well, and what's interesting is one of the things that has come out of the virtual workshop is we are seeing more groups of men form and continue because they've just spent 3 days in Zoom. They have the familiarity of the technology. That's how they met each other. And so to just say, hey, on Monday night, we're all going to get back on Zoom feels incredibly comfortable.
Yeah.
So I know of many stories of the small groups that were formed in the Zoom workshop have continued. And I even now have some coaching that I want to provide now that we're going back in person of what some things a group might do in order to maintain. And one of them is to begin practicing the technology sooner rather than later and getting more comfortable with it. And so all of that to say that even as we're coming out of this transition and we're opening the building up, there will be things that we bring from the pandemic and will continue, and we're excited to what is new. And, you know, we jokingly said when we think about the transition, we also have anxiety about opening everything up. You know, someone said to me, oh, Greg, you'll be great. You've done years of it, of the in-person workshop. But the reality is I've never done an in-person workshop after a pandemic. And it's kind of like what you were saying about, you know, working and going back and forth. I work with a lot of men who are finding their offices opening back up, but they're having to learn, how do I live and work in two spaces? So, you know, I still have my home office and I still have now a work office. How do I organize myself? And, you know, some companies are doing a great job to say, let's create an office space here that is conducive to those transitions. Other guys are having to figure it out on their own. So even though we've been open and anticipating this transition, don't be surprised if it brings some chaos with it.
While other companies are going, look how well our team performed while being at home, working virtually, and some aren't going back to the
Right.
office. They're going to maintain their position and do their work, but without the commute.
Right.
So, you know, change is everywhere
Yeah.
we look,
Yeah.
and it's all coming off the heels of this experience.
Right.
I think in the same vein, you know, our telehealth with individual clients has proven to be very, very successful, I believe. I'll speak for myself. And while I used to always say that in person was probably the best to look for, I have to say that I think for myself, sometimes I have better focus on Zoom than I do in person, just the way I work. And so I wouldn't even make that statement anymore. I think some of the women that I work with on Zoom, we actually make better progress with our conversations on Zoom than we sometimes even do in person. So.
And does it have anything to do with Callie, your cat, being
My
on
Callie,
your
my
lap?
cat. Well,
Does-
yes,
this is-
she loves being a part of that too.
she's
And
very
I can get a
supportive.
few more snacks a little more regularly or whatever it is.
Maybe we
but,
have to start bringing Callie
yeah.
into the office.
But all that to say, I think this change for us, I think we're going, the post-traumatic growth about change is, it provides new opportunities, and it certainly is for us. The pandemic is bringing new things that we would never have thought about.
Right.
I think it's bringing gratitude also and appreciation for things. I know we're also grateful, even today having lunch together, that we're here in person talking to each other, having some time to just, you know, talk about families and things we don't always. And, you know, we're growing with our own confidence, and we've learned some new things, and that's grown us in technology and in other ways we're handling things. And there's just good that has come out of it. And so it's a both and again. It's
Right.
created a lot of hardship in many ways, and we know that the growth that's coming out of it is going to serve us well, I think, moving forward.
Well, it's kind of the principle of moving. When Beth and I moved from the suburbs to the city, we created categories. You know, what are the things that we're going to get rid of that we don't need anymore? What are the things that we're taking to the apartment? What are the things that are still good, but we don't need them, so we're going to give them away or send them to Goodwill or some other resale place? And what are the things that we're going to need later, but we can put in storage? And so as we were going through our stuff, we created those categories. So I think change always opens up that possibility of, okay, what am I done with? What do I need to leave behind? I don't need to carry it with me. And what are the things absolutely that I want to carry with me through this transition? And then what are the resources that maybe I put in storage knowing that I don't need them now, but there may come a time when I need them later. And so even as we're thinking about this, We're aware that currently we don't have another virtual workshop scheduled, so we know that the June workshop, June 2021, will be our last virtual workshop for a while. So for those men who do want that experience, this is their opportunity. If you want to be able to experience it without the additional expense of travel or the additional time away, then absolutely take advantage of our workshop in June. And for those men that have been waiting for us to open back up so they can travel, know that we're ready and we're going to be anticipating you in July of 2021.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Which category did Beth put you in?
Unfortunately, she took me.
Oh, okay.
I made the cut.
Things I need to bring with me, things I can store away until I need it, that kind of thing.
Yes.
That's the good news. She brought you along. That's good. That's good. Well, I think that wraps things up for this podcast. Deb, we're very grateful again for you to be our guest and for your wisdom and experience sharing with our audience. As Greg was just saying, I'm sure you heard loud and clear of the opportunities coming up with our Men of Valor workshop virtually in June and then starting again in person in July. All of those details and registrations are available at faithfulandtrue.com. Click on the workshop page and you'll be able to find that. Until we come back and see you again next time, we hope that you'll visit our Faithful and True channel on YouTube. Please subscribe and click like. We appreciate that support. And in the meantime, until we meet with you again, we hope that the coming week is a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.